all these beers that we're going to taste today are all Küster beers.
Yep.
Which means that they are all Reinheitsgebot beers brewed using only 4 all-natural ingredients. We have a series of Weiss beers. When I brewed in Bavaria, I brewed in a Weiss beer brewery, and so I fell in love with that style, and we really wanted to focus on that here. And then we also have a series of lagers as well that we'll try.
Fantastic. So, quick question, because you're specifically mentioning Weiss beers.
Weiss beer.
My mom is from Schwabenland,
Right.
south of Ulm. They have Hefeweizen.
Same thing.
Same thing. Okay, there's no difference between the two.
It's one of the frustrating things when you talk, because the term Hefeweizen has been kind of taken as a marketing term, and a lot of breweries have used that term. The one that comes to mind is Widmer, which is not a Bavarian Hefeweizen. It's a wheat beer, no question, and Hefe is just yeast.
Yep.
All wheat beer is, all Bavarian style wheat beer is is unfiltered using with yeast still in suspension. The only exception being Kristallweizen, which is pretty rare, and that was used as a marketing term very, very late in the game. The style actually dates back about 5-6 centuries, and it originally evolved through Bohemia into northern Bavaria and eventually into Bavaria. Quick tale, when the Reinheitsgebot came around, was based on a Munich law of about 529 years ago. About 509 years ago, it was applied to all of Bavaria. The Wittelsbach family, who were the kings of Bavaria, granted an exception to a local lord in Degensberg, in the town of Schwarzach, that he was allowed to use wheat.
Really?
Wheat was otherwise preserved for bakers to make bread. You didn't want people to starve. This is 500 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So wheat was not allowed to be used because originally the Reinheitsgebot said barley malt, water, and hops. That was it. They didn't even know about yeast in those days.
Oh, really? So
correct.
Start with 3. Okay.
Started with 3 ingredients, and it dictated quality, price of the product, and it was really the world's first food safety law, food regulation, etc. So the Wittelsbachs granted these local lords an exception, and they quickly realized they made a mistake because they granted a monopoly. And the Degensbergers started making pretty good money on this. This led to a tax dispute for several generations, where the Wittelsbachs were campaigning against wheat beer as not being fit for a Bavarian. At that time, the beers of Munich were very dark, murky, and heavy. It was very hard water in this area. So the beers were dark, heavy, murky beers. This is what made Munich famous, dark beers. And wheat beer was a little spritzier, a little lighter, a little easier to drink, so it was popular. And the Wittelsbachs campaigned against it. It wasn't fit. They kept demanding tax tribute. Once a royal right was granted, they couldn't take it back.
Yeah, they started losing money.
Correct. Well, Hans Zygmunt was the local lord, and he made the fatal mistake of dying in 1609 without an heir. And if a royal clan, if a lord, a clan, disappeared without an heir, their right to the crown. Suddenly, the Wittelsbachs thought wheat beer was a great idea.
Sure.
So they took over the manufacturing for almost the next 300 years. Wheat beer was exclusively brewed by the royal brewer, the original Hofbräu house. What that means is the court brewery. Okay.
Nice.
And so the Wittelsbachs made this beer. This is original. Wow. And there's a handful that are available in the U.S. now. Schneider is probably the most famous one. Michael Plank makes a version. There's an Unertel that makes a version. If you see Erdinger Urweiss, this is a version of it. Okay, these are the old original style, what they call Bernsteinfarbenes or brick-colored wheat beers. This is what it was historically for centuries.
Yes.
Because nobody else could brew Weiss beer. Other brewers had other experimentation. Spaten was a very innovative brewer, and they slowly evolved and developed lager. Lager means to store. They figured out that beer tasted better when it was brewed at colder temperatures and stored at colder temperatures. And eventually the world switched to lager beers. Lager beers started to surpass wheat beers in popularity when we get into the 19th century.
This is awesome.
In 1872, a former brewer for the royal family named George Schneider, that name sounds familiar perhaps, he convinced the king, who was Ludwig II at the time, to publish Crazy Ludwig, the same guy, right? He was not very interested in politics. He was more interested in fantasies and castles. He convinced the king.
Yeah.
You get more than you bargained for.
No, this is going to be an entirely separate segment. I'm going to release this as a history lesson of German beers. This is phenomenal. Keep rolling.
So he convinced the king, and the king allowed the public now to brew weissbier or wheat beer.
Okay.
And there was a brief revival of the style, but really for the next 100 years or so, George Schneider was the one making wheat beer, and everybody else had moved on to lager. Okay.
Okay.
Until 1965. Okay. So what we think of as Hefeweizen, or Dunkelweizen, this all started out in 1965. Suddenly the big guys jumped on wheat beer and started making wheat beer, and this has now led to a revival of style, but it was done using pale malt. We didn't really have pale malt back in the day, so they didn't have the lighter colored Hefeweizen or wheat beer. As I said, all Bavarians think of Weissbier is Hefeweizen. Weissbier, Weizen, Hefeweizen, Weizenbier, it all means the same thing. Those are interchangeable terms, and all of it is understood as being mit Hefe, which just means with yeast.
With the yeast.
As I mentioned, by the 1960s, everybody was drinking lager beer, which was clean and bright, right?
Yeah.
Nobody had hazy beer, and so when the big guys started making wheat beer, some of them started filtering it to make Kristallweizen because they were marketing to lager drinkers. Lager drinkers didn't understand why my wheat beer smelled a little funny and it was cloudy.
Yep.
All it was a marketing use. Same with the lemon. Lemons did not exist 500-600 years ago in Bavaria. So this was a marketing piece because the phenolics, those banana, clove aromas that you get from wheat beer that you're expecting from a wheat beer were funny to lager drinkers. So they used the lemon to kind of, as a citric acid, would cut those aromas, and it was used to market wheat beer to lager drinkers. Okay. They don't generally, you know this from your time in Germany, you don't generally drink Weiss beer in the north.
Nope.
You drink it in Bavaria. It's about 25% of the Bavarian market, but really it's a Bavarian beverage. It's always understood as with yeast.
Yeah.
Of course, now in the U.S. we have all kinds of hazies, but we actually have a T-shirt that we do that say, hazy tradition for 600 years. It was hazy before hazy was cool.
That's great.
But it's because it always was done. It always was produced unfiltered with the yeast in it. So.
And not to be lost in the variances of beer, but Dave mentioned the German purity laws are over 500 years old.
Yep.
The United States is just over 250 years old.
Right.
Like you have German beer purity laws that are double the age of our nation as a nation.
And the Bavarian Reinheitsgebot was based on the Munich Reinheitsgebot from 25 years earlier. That actually dates from 1487. Okay.
So before Columbus discovered the Americas.
Yes, but what?
Like that's how old. Like they know something about beer.
And then the Bavarian Reinheitsgebot was in 1516. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then it was applied to all of Germany in 1904. 1904, I'm pretty sure it's 1904. And that lasted until the EU in 1992. In 1992, they couldn't enforce these laws around the rest of Europe. They're same with the Champagne laws in France and some of these farming. A lot of these things went away in 1992 when the EU came together. The German brewers, as a general rule, decided we're going to stick with the Reinheitsgebot as a competitive advantage. Now, they will do some export beers with adjunct, but for the Reinheitsgebot, they stick to it. It's water, malt. Now, they don't say it has to be malted barley. It can be any malted grain. So you would see oats, rye, wheat can also be used as long as it's malted. Yep. And malted gives you the fermentable sugars, right?
Yep.
Water and yeast. That's it. That's all that's allowed to be used. Now, they will have some export beers that have some other things, and you'll see some of the craft brewers now that will do some other things. Okay. But the Germans, as a general rule, have stuck to it. And part of the reasons people will sometimes think, it's not very creative when you only have 4 ingredients. And I would respectfully disagree, only that it's easy to say, well, if we want to taste, let's start out with the original here.
Yeah,
and if you take some aromas, so prost, we look each other in the eye.
Prost.
Okay. And you can tap, just kind of seal the deal. And if you take some aroma here, you're going to get a little bit of this, almost a nutty banana flavor. Take a sip and exhale through your nose. And you're going to get a little bit of nuttiness. Banana nut bread is usually the anchor that I use a lot of times for tasting notes here.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really easy to say, well, it's not creative, but you know what? You have to get those flavors naturally. And you have to do it by some of the brew house processes that we talked about, right?
Wow.
Or you can just put things in there to make it taste like that, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. This
I
is
would say
art.
it's less creative
Yeah.
to put those things in there.
Mhm.
It's more creative to actually have to develop these flavors naturally by doing it the old slow way,
Yeah.
because those flavors are there.
As
There's
you
roundness,
describe it,
subtlety of flavor.
yeah, the actual the nut and the banana flavors
Right.
is as if banana bread is.
Right.
And the key, as you mentioned, you take a sip, you swallow, you exhale through your nose,
Right.
and your whole palate and sensory system combines and does some figuring out there.
And it
It's
rolls.
awesome.
You get that aroma, then you exhale, the flavor changes, and then it's actually pretty clean at the end. If you think about it,
Incredible.
it's very low hop beer. You still get some of that late bready taste, but not. It's you don't have that lingering bitterness or what people call aftertaste. You have very little of that. It's relatively clean as you get through.
You have brewed an absolute winner right here. Like
So
this is
that's your
phenomenal.
historical version. Now you can move over here. This is again, people call it Hefeweizen, we call it modern. It's modern Weissbier. Okay. Now that's going to be a little bit more banana and clove forward.
Okay.
Okay. It's lighter, pleaser, a little bit sweeter, but it's from the same family. You're still getting those same estery notes that you're
Yep.
getting through your olfactory senses.
Okay. So you guys say prost.
Prost. I'm going to stick with the same thing.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, a difference right
Different.
off the bat.
Absolutely, it's different.
Totally different. Yeah, the nut presence has
Dissipated.
left. Yeah,
Yep.
but still a nice
And now
clean
as you move forward
finish.
here, Dunkelweizen, so this is made with chocolate malt. It's all distinct grain bills that are in these.
Yep.
And this is going to give you just a little bit more of a milk chocolatey banana flavor. You're still going to get those banana esters that people expect to get from wheat beer or Weiss beer.
Right
But-
off the bat, the aroma
right.
is different.
Yep.
Okay, here we go.
Heavier, more body.
Prost.
Symbol, mein Herr.
Danke. Gleichfalls. Yeah, the chocolate notes are there.
A little more body, a little heavier.
Yep. Full mouthfeel. I mean, they
4.9, 5.3, 5.7. So you're going to, it does have a little more, there's a little more sugar content, a little more body.
Yeah.
And you can see the legs on this. I mean, this is sticking to the glass. That's protein.
Sure.
That's first of all, it's a clean beer glass.
Yeah.
But then secondly, you've got protein and body there that's giving you that mouthfeel that we're really looking for in these styles.
So my uncle, when I was there, I spent the entire summer there after my senior year in high school. I worked for my uncle learning Zimmermeister Handiwerk.
Okay.
So he did German carpentry with
Sure.
the big 12 by 12s. Now they're not 12 by 12s, but that's the size and everything. But he explained to me, then I went to southern Germany, my uncle Kurt, we were having Hefeweizens. He said, Michael, it's all in German, but a good beer will hold its head for 7 minutes.
Mhm.
If it can't hold its head for 7 minutes, it's not a good beer. And I look at these that have been sitting here much longer than 7 minutes, and you still have a head. Obviously, it has dissipated time.
Right.
That's reasonable. But look at this. Like, there's
So,
that definition is
Pills,
coming
which is
through.
what this
Spades
word,
here.
we had the head on this pills, and this hasn't been touched, but that is still clean on that glass. And they will. That's the standard for a pills. Is a pills takes 7 minutes to pour.
Oh, look at
because
that.
you need to be able to drop. You need to be able to allow that fall down that you can top it off and fill to the line. And you'll see these glasses all have. I don't know if you can see these. They all have their markings, so you're getting the correct volume.
in liters.
Yep,
of
in
course.
liters. Yep.
It's
Yep.
I'm not telling this guy anything he doesn't already know about beer.
Oh,
Oh yeah, that's
we're all learning every day. We're all learning every day.
It's fantastic. It's great company, but these are absolutely amazing. My preference, because it's always personal and everybody's palate's different, but the original is the best.
That
This
is our number one selling
I
beer.
love
And a lot of it is, I mean, there's a story to it, but it is it's a unique style. It's a unique flavor profile. There's really not much else like it. It's interesting when you talk about the head here too, because these two beers are full-on Kusterer beers.
Okay.
These are two. This is actually an American lager.
Okay,
Okay, so there's adjunct in this beer, but you see the difference in the head.
clearly. Yeah, no doubt about it.
And it's not necessarily a fault of a brewer, but the ingredients are part of that too. It doesn't have the same body and protein content as these other beers that have more stuff.
And what's the alcohol content here?
That's 4.6.
Is that the lightest of this?
Well, yeah,
entire
this was a one-off. I just got this as a sample. This was a pre-prohibition beer. I mentioned earlier about the 6 German brewers that merged together to form the original Grand Rapids Brewing Company.
Yep.
One of them was a gentleman by the name of Adolf Getz. And he was a brewer, had worked for the Kusterer family. He had his own brewery for a while, and then was the original brewmaster for the Grand Rapids Brewing Company. And this is Getz Lager. So this was his pre-prohibition lager, which again was made with adjunct. This was done as part of our Brauhaus series, which was created at our downtown space. We have a smaller brewery downtown. So there is corn in this, all right? It's not a Reinheitsgebot beer, but that is a lighter. It's going to give you a lighter palate, which we're going to get to here in a second.
Sure.
And you can see it doesn't have the same protein content. You're not getting that glass.
Yeah. And he did this from a historic perspective, which is the theme of everything here.
Right.
Excellent.
Connections, interconnectivity. It's the same way we talked about the tables out here. You're making connections between people.
Yep.
We're making connections between history. And one of the cool things about beer, and one of the reasons I fell in love with this culture, is that it is a portrayal of human history. If you think about it, we've got a little human history in every glass. We've talked about the history of some of these styles. There's a reason. I mean, anthropologists, some of them will tell you that humanoids moved from hunter-gatherers to an agricultural society so that they had consistent source of grains to make beer.
Look at that.
It's the reason that we're all here, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So there's these connections that weave throughout history, and I always found it fantastic.
I love it. Okay, what's the next one you direct?
So we're going to get into lagers here. As I said, these kind of evolved 19th century or so. And so we're going to start out. We make about, this is what we have on right now, but we make about 16, 18 different lagers throughout the year. And seasonally, when we add them in, we've done probably 30 or so different lagers over time, okay? A couple of these then are consistently on, and then a couple of these then are rotators. So we're going to start with our Bohemian Lager. Okay. This is actually a Czech-style beer. Yep. And Bohemians, before we jump into it, I'll give you a little history on it. Bohemian Lager was an international invention. It was invented in 1842. People of the town Pilsen rioted that their brewery was subpar. They broke into the brewery, they threw beer in the streets, and they demanded better beer from the city fathers. City fathers hired a Bavarian brewmaster by the name of Josef Grohl, and he worked with a Czech architect. Both of them were in their early 20s. Josef had never run a brewery before. He grew up in a brewing family, and the architect, his name, had never built a brewery before. They traveled around Europe and did research. Wow. They borrowed pale malting technique because, again, most beer was dark and heavy in those days. But the English had figured out how to kiln malt and make lighter malts. They borrowed pale malting technology. They brought in the lager yeast that Grohl had brought from Bavaria, and they used the local Saaz hops that grew in Bohemia, and they made the world's first international beer that was clean and bright. A beer had never been seen like this before, and it became an immediate overnight sensation. By the time we get to the craft brewing world, literally 90+% of the world's beer was Pilsner-style beer.
That's true.
Miller Lite even claims to be one. It isn't really.
Right.
But it is a Pilsner-style beer, right? So this was light, bright. This coincided with railroads evolving in Europe. It coincided with glassware in Europe, that people were able to actually drink beer out of glass, that they could see through it, that it was bright and clear, rather than stone mugs or wooden mugs that they'd had prior to that. And technology had evolved where glassware was within grasp of normal people, not just the super wealthy, right? It exploded. So overnight, starting October, I want to say it was October 5th, 1842, this was launched, and it was an immediate worldwide sensation. And as I said, it kind of took over the world in terms of style. But this was... ours is actually based on České Budovice, which is the Czech version of Budweiser. So if you go ahead and drink this, you're going to see, it's actually malt forward. Again, we talked about malt in the brew house. It's malt forward. You're going to have bready, straw, and then as you exhale, you're going to get that light herbal aroma as you exhale through your nose, right? Yeah. So the hops are subtle. It's not going to whack you in the head with a hop bite. It's there. Yeah. It's meant for balance, and it's just a drinkable, sessionable, easy drinking beer. It tastes like beer.
Again, compared to the other three, all of a sudden you do have that crisp hop bite at the end. It's refreshing. It's nowhere near an IPA, and it's not supposed to be, but it's markedly different than the Weiss beers that we had prior.
You're going to find none of these beers are going to hammer you with hops. They're all malt. There's flavor in the malt that we're really trying to bring out.
Yes.
And hops act as a balance. It's not bitter or aromatic forward most days.
Great quality beers on everyone that I've tried here.
So we typically have a Märzen on, which is Oktoberfest. Yeah. However, we just got through that season and it's sold out, so we're a couple weeks from that being ready yet. But this was kind of the Northern Guild answer to that. This is a Dortmunder export, so it's an export strength lager. Okay. Again, this is going to be a little more even keeled than the Pils, a little less hoppy, a little more sweet, a little sweeter, so it's going to have maybe a slight hint of toffee, but roundness of flavor. Like I said, not going to have quite the hoppy bite. Also very, very drinkable. It's a little stronger in alcohol. You're a little over 6% on this beer.
Prost.
So it's going to be a little bit of a ninja beer that the alcohol can sneak up on you if you're not careful.
This is when let's say someone who doesn't drink beer, when they think what would beer taste like, this is, let's say, the traditional beer. Right. No doubt about it. It's very good. Yep.
It's a beer. This is just drinkable beer. Now,
this one had, I'd say almost like a sweeter tone to it. If you'd agree, I don't know, but that's what I picked up on compared to this one here. Both very nice.
This one's going to have a little more movement and flavor, I think. That's going to change in your mouth as you exhale and as you swallow, where this one's a little more even. It tastes, it's a beer.
Yep.
Now we're going to do a little, like I said, these are going to be seasonals and a little history. In fact, this was a homebrew collaboration.
Oh,
the
great.
gentleman that we saw out there in the tasting room that was eating Weiss. And this is a Baltic Porter. This is one of the world's oldest beer styles.
Baltic what?
Baltic Porter.
Porter.
Which is a lager.
Sure, yes.
Okay. But this came from Russian Baltic Sea areas. Germany at one time had part of that land.
Yep.
Okay. And this evolved as a lager.
They had at one time most of Europe. And then it's quickly changed.
Well, we talked about the unification of Germans. There were 3 Reichs. It all went bad by the 3rd. But there were 3 different attempts at unifying the German-speaking people.
Nice coffee tones in here.
So you're going to get some roasted tones that a lot more bite. This is 7.5%, so a much bigger beer, but it is lagered. You're going to find there's sweetness in that roasted nose, but yet this also is really clean. It's not going to linger as much as you might expect for the size of that beer versus maybe an imperial stout or something.
To the viewers, cheers, salute, and prost. Oh yeah,
I've been drinking that like crazy lately.
It's fantastic. This is
nice little winter warmer.
Yeah, for me, I'm very seasonal on the beers that I enjoy at certain parts of time. We're rolling right into the season.
Right.
It's perfect. And, there's so many, again, it's an American style, like bourbon, barrel aged imperials, 15%, pushing like barley malt content. It's almost too much for my personal preference. This is really nice. This is very
the problem with some of those is you can't drink more than one of them either.
No, you're one and done. No doubt about it.
Well, and that's one of the things that we were talking about earlier. I mean, there is so much variety in the U.S. beer market now, and to your point, everybody's trying to make something a little bit special when you get into bourbon barreling and bourbon barrel aging, and we've done some of that too, but different ingredients and flavors, and sometimes you just I like the classic version. I mean, this style has been around for centuries for a reason. Because it's good.
Yeah, for
sure.
So
to just do that classic historical style, it's almost unique in that nobody's doing it that way. So now this is totally the opposite direction, because this is really going to be really light and easy. This is a pre-prohibition style we started talking about a little bit earlier.
Yep.
This is brewed with adjunct. This is a very sessionable beer, only a little over 4.5%, 4.6. So it's a pre-prohibition lager, just a nice, easy drinking, drinkable, sessionable lager.
Sure. So. And again, I want to compliment you and Cedar Springs Brewing Company in the sense that you created an adjunct beer for the historical purpose to have that option, and you can talk about it. Where, of course, the macro breweries, they have adjunct lagers just purely for economics.
Yeah.
Right? You didn't brew this to be a moneymaker. You did this because there's historical significance.
Well, it's interesting, these pre-prohibition lagers, the styles evolved because of access to local ingredients. You couldn't get barley. It didn't grow. It doesn't grow as well in Michigan. I mean, you can grow it, but it's not really great. I mean, barley is better in the plains. So it did exist, but it was, whereas corn was plentiful, right? Yeah. So, I mean, they had some of these ingredients that, as long as they did them, as long as they had some barley, they could supplement that with these other ingredients, and it made it was more plentiful, readily available. It was less expensive for commercial brewers, of course, and it made a more drinkable product. It really took off during the war, the Second World War. Obviously, cheaper ingredients. It was a lighter product. It appealed to women who were entering the workforce for the first time in large numbers. And it really became the acceptable American style. But yes, it was definitely economic based. It was cheaper and more plentiful. Yep. That's the reason corn syrup or rice syrup are used in large macro brewing. And they also do what's called high gravity brewing as well. They brew a concentrate and they're adding water at packaging to get to the ABV that they want.
Right. Well, Dave, thank you.
No, you bet. Prost, salud.
And you know what? A little bit of adjunct. It's nothing to. This is something you can also be proud of. This is a great
absolutely
beer.
drinkable beer.
You know?
That was, like I said, that was done in the Brauhaus series. That was downtown. That was done on an infusion mash system.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
So we didn't do the step mashing there, but for what it is and what they were working on at those times, those were also infusion mash systems, and they were direct fire most likely. And so it probably is closer to what was being done at the time.
Fantastic. Well, Dave, I want to thank you, your time, your generosity of your time, your samples here. This has been fantastic.
We got to get this cameraman fed here.
Yeah, we do need to do that. I think we're going to stick around and grab a bite to eat of your special Munich breakfast. I saw you have Weiss, and pretzel.
Did you ever eat that while you were over there? Did you ever eat Weiss?
I ate that growing up. My mom had it all the time.
Well, as you get too far west sometimes in Schwaben, they don't do as much of it as they do in Oberbayern and Unterbayern.
Yeah, well, we would have Weiss first and Bratwurst, depending on what we chose to do. My uncle was a Metzger in Romeo, Michigan, so that it was fantastic. But this has been an awesome episode. I'm going to definitely make this a two-parter because we had a brewery tour, and then we had a lesson, a history of beer lesson here with Dave.
We're just scratching the surface, man.
Yeah, just scratching the surface. Of all of these, my absolute favorite would be the first one because you just can't get Weiss beers like this. Yes, you stuck with it. Prost!
Prost.
And cheers, salute, and prost to all of you. Winner every time.